From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Hello and welcome again. Our guest today is Jim Swift from the Weekly Standard. Welcome, Jim. Issue 1, Republicans versus Rod.
11 House Republicans, led by Congressman Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan this week, introduced articles of impeachment against Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. They accused Rosenstein of obstructing congressional oversight of the Department of Justice and of bias in the handling of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into possible Trump campaign collusion with Russia. But while Democrats say the impeachment charges are a partisan effort to deflect attention from the Mueller investigation, some Republicans are also uncomfortable with what their colleagues are doing. Led by House Speaker Paul Ryan, they fear that the impeachment is unjustified and a distraction that will alienate midterm election voters.
Pat, do you think this is about the Michael Cohen audio tapes, or is this a deserved pushback to executive power?
No, these fellas believe what they're doing, but it's going nowhere. The Republicans are not behind it. Everybody's going on vacation. You got only a few days left to the end of the session. The big news this week, Tom, basically is Michael Cohen's defection to the Mueller investigation and to the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York. It's not a problem in terms of any criminal activity on the part of Trump, but it does go to his credibility and the credibility of the people who talked about the famous July meeting with the Russians.
Right.
And so I think this is going to be the focus this week. And all I can say for Trump is he had a better week than Mark Zuckerberg.
Eleanor.
Well, Pat, you told me when you were working for Nixon, when it came out that he had lied about knowing about the cover-up for the break-in, when that came out, his support collapsed among his people. These are big lies that Trump has been caught in, and the revelations about the Trump Tower meeting, I think that really is, it's the smoking gun. If everything Trump has done in public, at rallies, in his tweets, his calling for the fact that he was going to give a speech about Hillary Clinton and then he doesn't, suggests foreknowledge of that Trump Tower meeting. If this were done in secret and we caught him on tapes, that would be the smoking gun. It's just as criminally impliable in public. And so I think the jig's up. I think the law is really catching up with him.
Jim, do you think, though, that the president's he has 2 factors perhaps in his favor here? Number one, as Pat says, there's no criminal liability at the moment, but also his base are fervently in support of him, and the economy is booming.
I think what Meadows is doing, along with Jim Jordan, is they're pandering to an audience of one. It's to President Trump. Paul Ryan is a dead-in-the-water, lame duck speaker. There's going to be a fight to be the next Speaker of the House, or maybe Minority Leader, depending on how the elections play out. And Jim Jordan is running for Speaker. And he and the House Freedom Caucus are trying to show fealty, in a way, to President Trump. It may be dead in the water less than 2 days later.
Do you think it's destructive to conservative values, taking on the Justice Department? Or is it the right thing to do?
I think it is harmful to conservative values for a party that has long touted that it's the rule of law to see such a quick pivot to attacking our Justice Department and our FBI. I got a little whiplash, I must admit.
Clarence.
You're not the only one. We're seeing whiplash all around. I'm old enough to remember when it was the left that kept criticizing the Justice Department and the FBI, for good reason in many cases. But things have flipped now, and it does look too defensive of a posture for Republicans, Jim Jordan and others, to be taking when you just turn to political tribalism, really, and say we're going to defend Trump at all costs, regardless of evidence and facts, because he's on our side.
And yet, Clarence, Rosenstein has not provided some of these documents.
Exactly.
This investigation is not over. It's only beginning.
Tom, everybody's got
let Clarence finish.
If this is the best people can do is to say he's taking too long, that's not a good reason to go.
But look, you take Comey and McCabe and Bruce Orr and the rest of them. There was a conspiracy, a cabal in there to get Donald Trump, and it's legitimate to investigate it. But let me tell you something, Eleanor. This thing's not going to be done, boom, because we found some tape. This is going to go, if the Democrats win the House, the Mueller investigation will be sent up to the House of Representatives. If the Democrats win, it maybe will go somewhere, then it goes to the Senate. This whole thing is going to end in an impeachment effort and against President Trump, which I don't believe will work.
Well, I used to think that the Republican Senate would never convict this president of impeachment, but I'm beginning to look at who will be in the Senate next year, including Mitt Romney. It is not impossible, depending on what Mueller comes up with. I don't think you can rule it out. But this president is in the 30s in some of those key Midwestern states. He is throwing. He is. I think obstruction of justice and collusion
from what we know. You got to be kidding.
Excuse me. Giuliani says it can't be obstruction or collusion because Trump is doing everything out in the open. That's the point I tried to make. If he did all these things in private and we caught him, we'd say we got him. He's hung himself in public. The case is being
nobody,
made.
not even the Democrats. We know all these incidents. Not even the Democrats are calling for impeachment right now. They say,
I'm not. Excuse me. I'm not calling for impeachment either.
See?
I am saying that there is suggestion that this president is got a criminal violations that he's going to face, and how our government deals with that. We'll see.
Clarence,
but he's in real trouble.
And I don't know what supportive evidence Michael Cohen has besides the tape, but we find out more of what went on in that room. It's looking a lot like collusion right now, or certainly conspiracy charges and obstruction of justice will look quite possible. The question is, I don't think that impeachment, however, is that certain, Pat, because a lot of Democrats, even now, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, say don't rush into impeachment because if you lose, remember what happened with Bill Clinton. He survived impeachment and he came out stronger than ever. So,
but how is
Jim Swift, what do you think?
Rosenstein answers to President Trump, and if I think that House Republicans who are concerned about certain redactions and things in documents, what do we not know, and all these things, President Trump is free to tell and direct Rosenstein to declassy anything that he wants.
How does this play out? When is Mueller finishing?
Mueller will finish when he's fine and ready.
When he's good and finished. What did you also want to, on a lighter note? What did you think of that photograph of Don Jr. and Mueller at Washington Reagan this week?
Flying out of the X terminal, 35X or whatever is tough enough, but that would be pretty awkward for a plane ride.
Yeah.
It's a Washington incident.
We got
Everybody
a
runs on
conflict
each other
here,
at the
Tom.
airport.
Conflict. People are saying we're not for impeachment, but they won't tell me how you plan to get rid of Trump without doing that, Eleanor.
Election.
I think there's something called resignation.
2020?
Eleanor, does the economy help
something
Trump?
called resignation, which you should be familiar with.
Well, Nixon was
Nixon experience.
Nixon was looking down the gun barrel at conviction and by the Senate.
And didn't have Fox News
you
to
all
back him
won't
up.
even go for impeachment.
He could be looking down the gun barrel at serious problems for his family.
Okay, serious problems.
Serious revelations that come out, and he may just well say, "I've had it. I'm walking away." I don't know what the end game here is, but this week the screws are really tightening on this man, and he is flipping out. I mean, his behavior he's flirting with war with Iran. He's starting trade
Flirting
wars
with Iran?
and then. Yes, that was Monday.
That's our third issue. Let me ask you, Eleanor, moderator alert. Ellen, let me ask you, does the economy in any sense help Trump?
It would be a lot worse without it, but I'm not sure he can count on that safety net because, again, the overall economy is great, but the pockets in the Midwest and people who should be feeling recovery aren't, and they know it's because the tax cuts weren't directed to them, and it's because of trade wars he started. So I don't think I think great. I'm glad for the economy is doing well. It's not doing well enough for all the people.
You agree?
His poll numbers are still low for a president who's leading the recovery of
but the economy will help, won't it?
So, well, it doesn't hurt. But look at Trump's numbers compared to other presidents.
But he's the highest. He's the highest the president has been virtually among Republicans since Bush after the beginning of.
And Jim,
this president among Republicans.
Let me ask Jim a question. Jim, do you think, though, obviously there is this division in the Republican Party, the Weekly Standard, not necessarily a flag-waving Trump base, but do you think there is a sense of unity from Republicans because of this economic success, seemingly?
It would be much harder without the trade war that is begun and is uncertain in length. The tax reform package that Republicans have been trying to pass for the better part of 20 years certainly put some wind beneath their wings. But when it comes to trade wars hurt everyone. But when it comes to targeting the Midwest, where mostly it is Republicans,
that's our next issue.
So it can cause a lot of pain.
Republicans are a shrinking portion of the electorate.
All right. So we're going on to our next issue. Issue 2, Trump's tariff turn.
We agreed today, first of all, to work together towards zero tariffs, zero non-tariff barriers, and zero subsidies on non-auto industrial goods.
Meeting with President Jean-Claude Juncker of the European Commission this week, President Trump announced a new approach to trade with Europe, pledging to end the current tariff war between the US and the European Union. The two presidents offered the prospect of significant reductions in existing obstacles to transatlantic trade. But while President Trump said the deal would offer an immediate boost to the US agricultural sector, European car manufacturers also saw significant rises in their stock prices.
Eleanor, who's the winner out of this trade agreement?
There's no deal here. This is just a lot of verbiage. He got the European Union to buy some more soybeans because China's not buying them. He is basically calling for a pause in the trade war he started. I mean, it is like the arsonist who's also a volunteer fireman on the side. He wants credit now for helping and bailing out farmers with $12 billion. Is he going to do that for every group he hurts? I mean, this is a bizarre policy.
Pat?
Well, you know, you talk trade war. We run $800 billion in trade deficits year in and year out, $12 trillion, all these factories gone, all these plants gone, all these jobs gone. People babble about free trade, fair trade. That's nonsense. It's about winners and losers. It's about rising and falling powers. Who are the three powers that have grown at the expense of the United States 25 years? Germany, Japan, and China. They all practice economic nationalism at our expense. I mean, this is where I disagree with Trump and Larry Kudlow and them. They're all acting as though we look at some 19th century textbook and tells us what to do, rather than to history and the effect of these policies.
Yeah, but your speech is a little
historically
yellow around
accurate.
the edges, around the edges, right?
All right, Clarence.
It's how America became number one.
Well, one thing
anymore.
Donald Trump's tariffs have shown us is that there are winners and losers at the same time. You can see how they reopened a steel mill in Indiana. Helped along
Granite
by
City,
the steel.
it's across from St. Louis.
There you go. But at the same time, though, we've got Midwestern farmers, soybean farmers. Illinois sends more soybean.
You got a good point. You got a good point,
else.
Clarence. The American people are such now. We're so addicted to this welfare, if you will, that you start to cut it off. You cut off the dependency, and the hows begin. I don't know that Donald Trump can do this.
Would you cut farm subsidies?
But that's not necessarily. That doesn't have to do with trade, in my judgment. You
It's
want to
welfare.
capture markets abroad.
But he doesn't have a policy or a plan. He just acts impetuously.
I don't disagree with you.
Okay, I'm glad
But
we
Trump,
found agreement.
All right, so Jim, how do you read this? I mean, is the Republican Party, though, is the Ryan narrative of free trade dead?
No, of course not. And it may be dead if the Republicans lose the House and are in a smaller minority than they have been before they took it back. But you didn't have to start a trade war to get EU to come to the table. Japan was able to do it, and they actually have a deal that is inked and done, whereas we just have the concept of a future potential agreement.
Let me ask you a
Are you
follow-up.
going to go back?
Wait, let me ask you a
Jim,
follow-up.
Yes.
You're going to go back to NAFTA and all that good stuff?
I mean, I think NAFTA was a net positive
And
for America.
even Hillary was against it, for heaven's sake. Politically, you can't do it anymore.
No, you can
Let Jim respond. Let Jim respond.
Well, I mean, Trump has moved on from NAFTA. I mean, his negotiators may be working behind the scenes, but he's changed his focus.
All right, let me ask you a
China
follow-up,
and Europe.
though. Do you think there's an opportunity in the sense that Republicans could invest in infrastructure to export liquid natural gas to Europe?
I think
undercut Putin.
Yes, that would. I mean,
you like that?
I like the export of liquid natural
All right.
gas.
Sorry.
Russia's a net seller, and they've used their gas lines to bully all of their neighbors. And we for all the Republican talk about exporting coal is dead pretty much, and natural gas killed it. Environmental regulations probably played a bit of a role.
But you know, the Germans want the natural gas from the Russians. They're in favor of Nord Stream 2. So they like.
So bring down the cost of American natural gas.
Yeah, well, that's down the road.
That requires a lot of building of infrastructure. I haven't seen this president's infrastructure plan. It was going to be the best ever.
Yeah.
Everybody loves infrastructure. Why don't we have it?
Yeah, where is it?
The Democrats. Well, you know, that's
you got a tax cut instead, Clarence.
Right.
Yeah, got a tax cut instead, which costs more money, but could give us another $1 trillion on the deficit.
But LaGuardia is still bad.
Thank you.
All right, curveball question. What did people think of Caitlin Collins, CNN White House reporter who was excluded from the White House this week? Was that fair, or was that an attack?
Shades of authoritarianism and punishing
Look,
reporters.
as a former director of communications at the White House, Look, to be impolite when the President of the United States is sitting with a foreign leader and yelling questions at him, that practice of journalists ought to stop.
We've been doing this for, what, 3 years?
Well, we've been doing it for more than that.
But it's called a pool spray, though.
Yeah,
because
Sam
it's a
Donaldson,
No, it's a pool.
Sam Donaldson pioneered the yelling of the question,
Yes,
and he's considered an icon.
Right.
You're not going to shut that off. But as a communications person, you can withhold special favors.
All right, I want to hear from Clarence, the Pulitzer.
You can't ban someone from a public
Eleanor,
press
let Clarence in.
I'm going to finish, whether you like it or
Eleanor's
not.
doing fine. That's all right. You're doing fine.
Pulitzer.
No, I just wanted to say that that the pool sprays, though, are a pool effort. She wasn't just representing CNN; she was representing all the press, and so she has to ask the questions that the other reporters want to ask.
I don't think you would do that.
They do it
Clarence,
all the time.
I don't think you would.
All the time.
I don't think you would go into where the President Reagan is meeting with a foreign leader, interrupt him and start yelling questions about some scandal.
I can show you tapes, Pat. They've been doing it for years.
I know they've been doing it. That doesn't make it right.
Well, you know what would be good if President Trump would have a regular press conference, a formal press conference. He hasn't had one in over a year.
I agree.
And that's why reporters have to grab these episodes.
You can criticize.
I mean, we have to keep in mind that this Caitlin Collins worked for the Daily Caller.
Yeah.
She's not Jim Acosta, who is become the boogeyman of Sarah Huckabee Sanders and the White House press corps. She worked for Tucker Carlson's conservative publication. She's not one of these left-wing.
Yeah, she was doing her job. And,
well, if you want to know why the press is not popular, if that's her job,
if making America great again means going back to reporters sitting nicely like potted plants, it's not going to happen.
All right.
Yeah, the reason why the press doesn't look good in the eyes of the public is because the same reason as politicians, very much like what's the old story? You should never watch either of them being made. When it comes
sausage.
Sausage. Thank you.
All right. On that sausage note, when we come back, Iran and some other stuff.
The McLaughlin Group is brought to you in part by Eric.org. With gridlock in Washington, states are stepping in to mandate paid sick and family leave policies, creating a compliance nightmare for companies with a nationwide workforce. The ERISA Industry Committee is fighting back. Learn how we can help your company at Eric.org.
For more than a century, the Greater Washington Board of Trade has focused on growing our regional economy. We work every day to foster collaboration, build pipelines for skilled workers, embrace innovation, and attract investment. We must think, plan, and act as a region to better leverage our shared assets so we can continue shaping and advancing a vibrant regional economy for the next 100 years.
Issue 3, Iran.
A war of words between President Trump and Iran heated up dramatically this week. First, Trump tweeted that President Hassan Rouhani should never threaten the U.S. But on Thursday, the commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guards Quds Force, or Jerusalem Force, the Guard's external action unit responsible for terrorist activities, upped the ante. In a hyper-aggressive speech, Qasem Soleimani warned America, quote, "We are closer to you than you think," end quote. The rhetoric does not take place in a vacuum. Instead, it reflects the Trump administration's escalating effort to restrict Iranian oil exports and Iran's business deals with European nations. Trump officials hope that this will pressure the Iranian economy into collapse and force Tehran's compromise to U.S. interests. But note this, on Wednesday, Iranian-supported rebels in Yemen again fired missiles at cargo ships transiting the Red Sea, a warning from Iran, perhaps, that it might do the same against oil tankers in the Persian Gulf in the near future.
Jim, is this odd policy from the president who said America needs to stop getting into stupid wars?
Well, I'm not sure the president really wants to get into war with Iran. He's never really been much of a hawk. People think that because he brought on Bolton as NSA that he now is going to be hawkish. But getting out of the Iran deal, which he promised his supporters, has really reverberated through the economics of the region. And their currency is down by, I think, 50% or more. And it's
so
really
you
causing
support
trouble.
these activities?
Yeah, the Weekly Standard thought the Iran deal was bad. It's not clear what the president's policy is, and a lot of it could be behind the scenes.
Right.
But from an overt standpoint, aside from his tweets, we really don't know what his response has been.
I think Trump thinks if he just keeps tightening the screws, Iran will cry uncle. And I don't think if you study history and that particular country, it's going to work that way. But as Pat predicted a couple of weeks ago, there's some sort of a deal has been worked out between Putin, Netanyahu, and Trump. And we don't know what Trump and Putin said behind closed doors. What did Trump give to Putin to extract probably a promise to go hard on Iran? I think Putin is playing Trump, but all the more reason why we need to know more about what went on with those two leaders.
You know, a war with Iran would be exactly what the never-Trumpers would love. It would have two good effects. They want a war with Iran. Secondly, it would destroy the presidency of Donald Trump. However, we are moving, as you suggested, we are moving with these intensive sanctions, demanding the Europeans go ahead, reducing the oil exports of Iran. Now the Saudis are firing on Hodeidah port in Yemen. You're moving down to a point where you almost make some collision inevitable, and I don't see what the end game is diplomatically that the Trump administration, Trump White House want. Mattis doesn't want a conflict. I think Bolton and Pompeo have both wanted one for a long time.
What does Putin want?
Clarence.
What does Putin want is the question.
What does Clarence think?
That's right. And Trump, this past weekend, word came out that they've been working on trying to revive the idea of an Arab NATO, pull the Arab nations together in an alliance to deal with Iran. So we're seeing a Trumpian policy appear piece by piece. The question is, will we be able to work with them in a way that will also help to reduce Iran's support to terrorism in Syria and other areas over in the region.
And Qasem Soleimani is.
You got the Saudis want a conflict. They want Iran smashed. The Gulf Arabs do. The Israelis do. The Israeli lobby in D.C. does, and the neocons do. And all these forces, I don't see the forces that are holding us back, and I don't see at the end what happens as we keep pushing down here. What does Trump want that could satisfy him, that the Iranians could do to avoid the conflict that's over the next hill?
But we have a president who's willing to fool around with a dangerous foreign policy situation, in part to distract from his domestic woes. I mean, other presidents have done it. Nixon traveled all over the world during Watergate. Pardon me?
He worked with North Korea, but I've got my doubts about Iran.
Well, it's interesting to me to see Trump want to get into an Arab NATO while he seems to be trying to pull us out of the European NATO. But this is the new world that he's trying to shape.
Does anyone, Jim, do you think here there is a potential? Qasem Soleimani, right, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, very aggressive foreign intelligence operations. They tried to blow up a conference in Paris recently. Is there a risk that if Qasem Soleimani does something, frankly, it doesn't matter what U.S. policy is, because the requirement from Congress for vigorous Iran action would push Trump's hand?
Sure, and one of our reporters was actually at that conference in Paris that that almost got bombed. And if there was a sort of barracks type bombing or terror attack, who knows how Trump would have responded?
Iran does not want a war with the United States. Whatever happens, they'd be smashed, just like Iraq was, and Afghanistan was, and Libya was, Yemen was, and Syria was. Nobody wants a war with the United States. We're the ones pushing this thing and being pushed.
And yet it seems like the idea here is to try and implode the economy.
Oh, I think Trump thinks that's going to work. But his appreciation of history is, a millimeter deep. I don't think he studies anything, and so he doesn't play chess. He doesn't know what the moves are down there. He just knows what feels good, and he thinks, how can they stand it? Let's just keep pushing. Surely they'll come to the table.
On another note, who this week, a very popular foreign leader in his own country, had his first signs of real major issues?
Oh.
Not Macron.
Vladimir Putin. Why?
Oh.
Pension reform.
His economy, he's down 50% in some polls because of this issue in Russia. Putin is, but look, Putin's got other problems as well. My view on Putin is, look, he's an open book. We ought to be able to deal with him. Other American presidents have dealt with far more dangerous Soviet leaders than Vladimir Putin.
Putin is an open book.
Sure, we know
this is not a man of great candor and openness.
I mean, in terms of what he wants to do, look, he's a Russian nationalist.
Right.
You can't deal with that?
He kills journalists.
Right.
He kills journalists
You
and does
understand-
whatever he wants to do.
You ought to seen what Stalin did, kid.
Okay.
No. I will agree with this, though, Pat, that we do know what Putin wants. We know his priorities are better than we know what does Trump expect from Putin.
You got Xi Jinping, you got Erdogan, you got Sisi, you got all these people all over the world. Yeah. We can deal with every one of them.
But they're not pulling the puppet strings of our favorite president in Washington.
Jim,
that's the mystery.
What do you think about Putin very quickly? And then Imran Khan, Pakistan.
Well, I think Pat is onto something here, and we're with the Russia investigation. We're seeing people on the right, on the pro-Trump right, saying, well, what's so bad about colluding with Russia? That will turn into, why don't we work with Russia more? We should be working with Russia.
All right, Imran Khan.
They're so trustworthy after all, you know? I mean, this is what's incredible to me.
I haven't really studied that issue. I'm going to...
What an honest answer. Cricket. Anyway, on that note, we will be right back with predictions.
Oh, the new Pakistani president.
For more than a century, the Greater Washington Board of Trade has focused on growing our regional economy. We work every day to foster collaboration, build pipelines for skilled workers, embrace innovation, and attract investment. We must think, plan, and act as a region to better leverage our shared assets so we can continue shaping and advancing a vibrant regional economy for the next 100 years.
Predictions, Pat.
My friend Lanny Davis, who has emerged as the spokesman for Michael Cohen, I think he had a fairly rough first week, and I think he will gradually fade from view, which is not what Lanny does well.
Right, yeah, better not ever predict Lanny Davis will fade from view. I think he'll be around. My prediction is that the focus on Brett Kavanaugh, his confirmation to the Supreme Court, will not be about abortion rights and Roe versus Wade, will be about his views about executive power and whether he would be a toady for President Trump if he was seated on the court.
Interesting. Jim?
I think it's going to be a hot August for House Republicans in their 4-week recess, and could be further complicated by what's going on with Mueller.
Okay, interesting. Clarence?
Keep an eye on that Beto O'Rourke challenge to Ted Cruz. He's closing the gap, and I'm not predicting victory yet, but look for some surprises there on the Democratic side. Okay,
interesting. I predict that China will fire warning shots at a U.S. vessel in the South China Sea in the coming months, near term. See what they're doing with South Korea. And here's a random fact. 60 years ago today, NASA was established. Just 11 years later, NASA would put a man on the moon and expand the frontiers of human possibility beyond the stars. We should be spending more on NASA so as to put men and women on Mars. Setting that course would inspire new students of science and math, and it would foster a sense of unity in America that is sadly lacking at the moment. Also remember Lieutenant Colonel David Green, who was the U.S. Marine Corps, killed in 2004, today or yesterday. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.